Let me help you let that out so you can let the love and the light in, so you can grow instead of just get by.
Right. And that's one of the things I'm appreciating about my therapy sessions is my therapist is giving me specific tools that can help me get through my anxiety, get through my grief, you know, and it's also a Black man too. So it's just like a certain comfort.
That's right.
That I can reveal certain things and, you know, why I'm numb. I've been called a nigga in 5 states. And so the last time someone called me a nigga, I literally just had to ignore it. So I literally ignore microaggressions and different things like that. This current administration is cutting grants. I mean, over $1 billion of grants that help put counselors, social workers, therapists, psychologists in schools are now being cut. And these grants wanted to help create equitable access so that people could see, you know, clinicians and mental health support that look like them.
Right.
And now these grants are being pulled. $1 billion. They're school districts now that multiplied their mental health support by 3 because of this grant. And now they have to cut it. Welcome back to the Know Your Rights Camp podcast, where knowledge is power and power is people. We have a special guest with us today.
Peace. It's your friendly neighborhood psychologist, Dr. Milo Dodson.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Today we're talking about mental health and wellness. How would you define those terms?
Man, so I went to school for a really, really long time, so I can break it down from the textbooks, but just to get to it for the people, think about mental health consisting of 3 main areas. So we have our thoughts, so basically over the course of the day, all the various thoughts that we have. Second being our emotions, so how we're feeling, what our emotional well-being is over the course of the day. And then ultimately, our thoughts and our emotions have an impact on our actions or our behaviors. So if we're thinking, I belong here, if we're feeling good, then obviously we're going to be able to perform at our best or to do the things that we love to do in life.
Mm-hmm. And my understanding, wellness is a bit more broad and it encompasses more of like your sleep, your diet, and your social media intake and all of that good stuff.
Oh, that social media intake. So in a general sense, think about wellness as kind of like a catch-all or like an umbrella term. So you have mental health, you have physical health. You can even think about financial well-being, financial wellness. But on a mental health sort of adjacent level, you have your emotional well-being, your psychological well-being, and your social well-being as well. So wellness is kind of like an overarching term that's used and defined differently in different spaces. But more times than not, again, mental health is really about your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions or your behaviors. So
Nice.
In the current times, the current administration, everything going on in the world, we know that mental health and wellness is a huge topic. Not just because people aren't quite sure how to maintain their mental health and wellness, but also access to, you know, mental health resources and wellness resources. So what do you think are the major issues right now?
I would say right now and even historically, we know stigma is the number one barrier for people who have access to services actually getting connected to services. So I would say stigma being more than just a 6-letter word, it's really our set of beliefs about mental health and about what getting connected to a therapist or getting connected to a professional can actually offer to us. So if you go in and you think I have to be at a certain negative state of well-being, right? I have to be so severely impacted that I deserve to then get services. More times than not, you're not going to follow up on services, right? And so with that stigma, trying to work with folks to deconstruct that, to your question, especially now, because again, it's not just about trying to maintain or trying to get through this, but we want to actually like push through this and thrive. And when we're being told by various sources of leadership at all levels of government that we, at the very least, don't even deserve to exist, that we don't deserve to be in certain places, like I know I need support to be able to get through that and again, get to that state of well-being and thriving. So.
And how has stigma evolved like over, you know, the past few generations where nowadays we have a whole nother generation with unique mental health needs and challenges from whether it's social media, the pandemic, and other things.
For sure.
But do you think stigma, there's a little less stigma when it comes to seeking services now because of, pop culture and other things?
Yeah, I think we've seen over time and over the decades, we've seen throughout the decades that stigma is decreasing. We have more public figures, we have more celebrities, we have more artists and athletes talking about their own journeys with therapy in particular, and even just their mental health challenges overall. I think dating, decades ago, we would see mental health and even, to get more specific, suicide being criminalized.
Right.
So the previous and sort of outdated language at this point was somebody had committed suicide. And the reason is that it would be illegal for you to try to make an attempt on your life, right? So nowadays we try to work through and deconstruct that stigma by saying somebody attempted suicide, and we don't use committed suicide anymore for that reason.
Right.
So I think now people are a little bit more familiar with mental health. Social media is really working to champion more of a pro-health standpoint.
Right.
And I think, again, we're seeing less and less stigma.
Like I think of one of the most trending songs right now is Doechie's Anxiety Jam, and I'm seeing young people talk about their anxiety more, especially I believe this generation is called the anxious generation sometimes, the young folks, just with everything they're dealing with. So you do see it more. When I was a teen, I don't remember anyone talking about anxiety.
Right.
I remember feeling anxious. I remember feeling this sensation in my body. I remember certain people triggering it. I remember the police triggering. I used to always wonder, like, how come I feel a little tense when the police are around? Literally, even if I'm not doing anything, but realizing I was conditioned through, literally one of the first situations where a gun was pointed at my head by a police officer and what you would see, so that's both post-traumatic stress and anxiety.
That's right.
But when I was a 12-year-old, I didn't have that language, and these conversations weren't happening,
No, not. First, let me just say thank you for sharing that. I think when we look across any topic, right, we feel more at ease with topics that are discussed more frequently. And when there are certain things that are taboo, you're kind of adding to the stigma that way. Whereas if you talk about something, you're normalizing that. The first thing that people are trying to talk about when you're like with a random stranger in public, oh, look at this weather today. It's a nice 72 degrees, right? And that's because we can all relate to that. It's so common to talk about whatever the heck the weather's looking like. So if we talk about the experiences that we have, we normalize that. And we create a power for ourselves to feel like, you know what, I have more agency to navigate this thing called life. So yeah, there's lots and lots to continue to do, but I think we're definitely making strides in decreasing that stigma.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a shame, especially in communities of color, in our own way, which is ironic because we have all of this trauma from oppression, colonialism. And I know like the American Psychological Association recently or a few years ago came out and acknowledged racism as something that, has significant impacts on us psychologically, right? On like social determinants of health. It's one of those things. So it's ironic that communities of color have this stigma and we have our own stigma and won't seek mental health. Like I myself just had my first therapy session last week for the first time at age 40. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it, and thank you. Can I get a fist bump?
Yeah, hell yeah.
It shouldn't have taken so much for me, but I remember it's kind of like jumping off a cliff, that I knew I had to get down. I had all these things going on. I'm grieving and I'm going through things in my social life and family life. So I felt something. I felt different, and I was still afraid, but I knew I had to just jump off and,
There's something really powerful about that analogy that like, I'm just going to jump off this cliff to then get a medical appointment. Right. And thinking that through, it's like, I have to jump into the unknown and something that for so many millions of people had brought more fear than it did help, right? And so I think it's working through like the cultural mistrust of the healthcare system, in particular what mental health care has looked like, and even our fist bumps to really affirm that for you. It's also like, yo, I just had to affirm the fact that you went for an appointment.
Right.
Because I know how
just
real
thinking
that
that.
is, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, hey, man, did you go to the doctor like last year? Like, well, yeah.
Right. It's
like,
to get a physical is
I'm not,
normal.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily giving you, oh, you had a bronchitis last year? Like, that's what's up. Like, thanks for
Right.
getting that checked out. So I think as we're balancing not just getting back to neutral and to treat the symptoms, I think the goal is to really take more of a pro-health standpoint,
Right.
and to leverage mental health to actually give us more joy. And I know you're a big fan of joy too. I think
Yeah.
we
I
talked
am.
about. Yeah.
Well, I just think it's interesting what you're saying. Like, I'm sort of stuck on that we don't, even if it's in the phrase mental health, we don't think of mental health as in the same vein as physical health. Right. It felt like either an option or something that you had to be quiet about, right? And that's crazy to me because my mom works in mental health. She's a mental health nurse. And she has been since I was about 12 years old. But I don't think I could define mental health until I was in my 20s. And it's not because we didn't talk about it at home. It just became a thing where you don't talk about mental health because we thought maintaining your mental health was not acknowledging it, right? It's like we don't acknowledge it out loud.
That's right.
We don't have the terms, and so we don't know how to talk about it. And then we keep it so hidden that we think we can just make it go away. We think it's like a headache. Well, it'll just go away
If I just ignore it, I don't have to deal with it
go away,
anymore.
not realizing
Right.
that we're making it worse. And also the analogy of just jumping off a cliff. I wish it was something more pleasant, you know? Like, I wish the analogy was something a little bit less extreme, but it feels extreme,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm diving into a part of myself that maybe I haven't
Yeah.
addressed. Like some people call it like shadow work, right? Where you're looking
Yeah,
at all these
yeah.
subconscious things that are there. So I was afraid to
That's right.
look into that shadow a bit, because it's a lot of things I've been neglecting,
Yeah.
denying,
Yeah.
numbness,
That's right.
and feeling like my numbness was a gift.
Yeah.
For a while. Like, I mean, my name is Dr. Knucklehead for a reason, in part because of my numbness to certain things that I use as kind of like my superpower. But numbness also, you have to be careful with it because humans aren't numb. You have to feel things, and you're supposed to feel certain
And
things.
I think that's the balance on a continuum, in a sense, of coping strategies. I think at some point, numbness served you or helped you get through, right? Just to get by.
Right.
And if that's a strategy, maybe we think about a range of different types of strategies. So if I'm like, I can take this from you, but let me give you this as a strategy instead to not only help you acknowledge, to sort of numb the pain, but let me actually help you like break that pain down.
Right.
Let me help you let that out so you can let the love and the light in so you can grow instead of just get by.
Right. And that's one of the things I'm appreciating about my therapy session is my therapist is giving me specific tools that can help me get through my anxiety, get through my grief, and it's also a Black man too. So it's just like a certain comfort.
That's right.
That I can reveal certain things and, why I'm numb. I've been called a nigga in 5 states. And so the last time someone called me a nigga, I literally just had to ignore it. So I literally ignore microaggressions and different things like that. Something like that a Black man could understand and be helpful with,
Yeah,
And
for
it's
sure.
unfortunate that this current administration is cutting grants. I mean, over $1 billion of grants that help put counselors, social workers, therapists, psychologists in schools are now being cut. And these grants wanted to help create equitable access so that people could see clinicians and mental health support that look like them.
Right.
And now these grants are being pulled. $1 billion. There are school districts now that multiplied their mental health support by 3 because of this grant. And now they have to cut it.
Yeah, and I think it's actions like that which are counterproductive and counterintuitive to creating a healthy country. And by extension, also add to the stigma that we were talking about earlier, right? If you're cutting something, it's like, well, first question being, why?
Right.
And I think if you're maybe afraid or you're hesitant to try therapy in the first place, well, if they're cutting something, well, maybe I don't really need that.
Right.
And a lot of the cuts that were done, at least within the state of California, from what I'm familiar with, So a couple months back, I went to DC to advocate with the American Psychological Association for graduate school education programs like Children's Hospital LA, I think at UCLA as well, and to create a network of providers to actually serve communities that way. So with these cuts, you don't have those services anymore. You don't have those points of access. So I think in the short term, it's like, well, let's quote unquote save money. And in the short term, just like with numbing the pain, that's a short term cover up, but it's not a sustainable solution.
Right.
And we're going to see, just like decades ago, when services are removed from communities, we're going to see ripple effects and systemic impact that way. And it's not looking good.
No, and like you said, looking at the intention of why funds were pulled and why they were there originally in the first place. Like this billions of dollars for schools was the part of the Safer Communities Act passed in 2022 after the Uvalde school shooting. You know, that was a tragedy, over a dozen young people lives taken. And so there was an acknowledgement from the federal government that, okay, we need more mental health supports in schools.
Yeah.
You know, these mass shooters, these school shooters are usually someone who is not getting services or support and have needs. Now they've pulled that off, pulled that away, pulled that rug.
Interesting too, because that was a bipartisan bill. That was something that everybody in the federal government, by say everybody, that ostensibly, you know, both sides, as it were, agreed on. And so for this to be pulled, and it's not just being pulled gradually, they're saying that if you had 4 or 5 extra counselors or all these resources, we're not scaling it back. We're just yanking the rug out from everybody.
Right.
And that's tough, because not only is it the stigma for people who haven't accessed the resources, but what about the people who are currently accessing the resources?
I'm glad we're talking about this, because, so check this out. The stigma around mental health works kind of in some tricky ways at times. People who historically have caused mass shootings, who have led to violence, the research would show that there's no significant amount of research that people who commit these crimes are automatically experiencing mental health challenges. The people with mental health challenges and more severe diagnoses, symptoms, et cetera, those folks would be more likely to be victims of violence as opposed to perpetrators. But our sense of stigma and our lack of understanding about the overplay of violence and mental health challenges create this narrative that isn't backed by the research or the psychological science. So automatically it's like, well, this person commits this mass shooting, there's a mental health challenge. And then that has ripple effects on building that stigma up, where that, again, that's just not supported by the research.
Right, because it makes it seem that mental health has to be extreme.
Correct.
Mental health has to be so extreme that if I just, quote unquote, just have anxiety, that doesn't measure up to me needing to go seek out services.
Yeah, and people who have mental health concerns or challenges are automatically violent by extension. That's not true. People who are experiencing anxiety, you may not have an anxiety disorder, but you can experience anxiety. So research on that point is 1 in 5 adults annually will experience a mental health diagnosis or challenges. But even though that's 20%, 100 of us have mental health all the time.
Right.
And I myself, as a psychologist, again, I went to school for a really, really long time to study psychology. And that means that I still have to keep my own mental health in check.
Right.
Because there's a difference between studying something and being a black man in America and living this shit.
Right.
So when I went to therapy myself, that was the best thing that I could do for my clients, for my family, and for colleagues. So we all have mental health all the time.
Yeah. And speaking of being a black man and just being a man in general, what are some ways that toxic masculinity and patriarchy sort of intersect with our mental health system and stigma?
Man. So going back to the definition of mental health we talked about, thoughts, feelings, and actions. If I have this preconceived thought of what it means to be a man, I have to uphold that at all costs. So essentially, I think a man is XYZ, strong, not a sissy. So
Doesn't
unpacking
cry.
sexism, I don't cry, right? So I feel like I have to present myself in a certain way. I have to be strong and tough. And then by extension, I'm holding on to this sense of an ill-defined sense of strength, right? At all costs. So essentially to feel is to fail. And I have to succeed at all costs. So I'm bottling up all my energy. I'm keeping it all in because I just want to succeed, right? And so this toxic sense of masculinity not only has a negative impact on me as a man, but also those around me. And even for folks who may identify in across the gender continuum, different genders, being influenced and their sense of self being influenced by toxic masculinity, even for folks who don't identify as a man, right? So we can't heal what we don't express or what we don't let out. And as a resource, just want to encourage folks to check out Adolescence on Netflix.
Okay, it's a series.
Yeah, it's a short term. It's like maybe 5-6 episodes, and each episode is shot in a single take. And it's, man, it's something. I'm not gonna give anything away, but just that works. Having that exposure and watching that, I think is helpful for young men. There isn't really representation from a racial ethnic perspective from like the main character, but you see other folks having those conversations in the series for sure.
So another issue in mental health, it deals with different diagnoses being undiagnosed and untreated. And I understand that could be different issues contributing to that, whether it's lack of access to getting assessments and getting services, but also the tools themselves and the perspectives of people doing that. So what are some of the issues with both services being undiagnosed and untreated?
I think one of the biggest pitfalls is people saying to themselves, well, I have anxiety symptoms, so like I have an anxiety disorder. And we go through life by self-diagnosing and or we use diagnoses as adjectives. So like going back, we talked about the weather earlier, like, man, weather's bipolar, right? And it's like, it don't work like that.
Right.
And so I think we first need to have a better conversation, more education about diagnoses. Second being a diagnosis can only be provided by an actual mental health provider in that type of clinical setting. So even though I'm a psychologist, even though this is not therapy, this is educational, it's still important to know that it's in that setting. That being said, in those settings, kind of as a third point, we have to make sure that our mental health professionals are trained and have the knowledge and skills to provide diagnoses to a diverse set of clients, right? Because the way that I experience anxiety, the way that I've experienced depression is not going to show up the same way as perhaps a white man or a queer black woman, for that matter, right? So I think knowing that symptoms, as we're creating these diagnoses, it's not just a checklist, but really sort of like check mark, and then what's the greater context here? So,
do you have any tips for folks who are listening to this and hopefully getting encouraged to seek out resources? Because I know what you were just saying is people may not find the right person to speak with right away. So do you have any advice for folks who are starting this journey, trying to figure out what to do?
First and foremost, I want to encourage and empower folks to be patient with themselves. When we've been in pain for so long, sometimes, again, to your analogy earlier, it's like, man, I'm going to jump off this cliff to find help, right? And so I finally created this sense of confidence to go find somebody. I want that help right then and there. And again, just want to encourage folks to be patient with themselves, be patient with the process. Just like any sort of customer service experience, it may not be the first therapist that you connect with that you stay with, right? So being patient with that, asking those questions of, I want to work on this, this, and this. What's been your experience with clients with these symptoms? Similarly, it's important for me, as an example, as a Black man, to bring my identities into therapy. What's been your experience with working with clients who are also Black men? Or what do you think about, what's your understanding about these identities in general? So just being more empowered, being more educated, like this is your opportunity to heal and to grow.
Got it. I had a question for you, actually. You asked me this and I didn't get a chance to answer it, but you did say that coming out of understanding mental health and wellness is not just diagnosis and not just speaking to the pain, but finding the opposite, right? Finding the joy. So what is your joy?
Oh man, if you've heard me talking, I'm sure you two have. I love me some ice cream, and I promise you, I'm not just saying this, but shout out to Ben, shout out to Jerry. Those two brothers wrote my dissertation. Pistachio ice cream in particular at that point, but now my favorite, strawberry cheesecake. So ice cream is my joy. Exercise, being outside in nature, traveling the world in business class and first class on credit card points is my joy. Shout out to my amazing wife, Yessie. That's like, we have to do a whole nother podcast on credit card points.
Yeah, I'm like, the credit card points disclaimer was a really important qualifier there.
Just to be clear, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Credit card, traveling business class first class on credit card points.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think just being in community, connecting with other people, humans in general, we're literally hardwired to be social beings. So being intentional about how I spend my time, but also with whom I spend my time. I'm not going to Supercuts to get a haircut, right? I'm going to the barbershop.
Right.
Shout out to Remo, my barber, for the last, like, no joke, 30 years.
Nice.
Right? There's a sense of healing that happens in the barbershop.
Oh yeah.
And so I think those are some of the ways that I get joy.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for joining us again on the Know Your Rights Camp podcast.
I love being here. This is family. This is community for me. This is healing. So.
Healing. Well, that's one of the things that bring me joy, brother. Appreciate
there
it.
It is. There
Awesome.
it is.
There's that joy.
Thanks for joining us on the Know Your Rights Camp podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media at Your Rights Camp and subscribe on YouTube at Know Your Rights Camp.